So sorry about that. We just, the timing of things didn't make it so that we could do that. So bummer. But it's still great information, and I think you're all here because you want to get this information, and probably like me, because you want to be in community, and because we all need a space to talk about this and about everything that's going on. So, this is, I think, a really important time, just as we see human rights being blatantly disregarded. We think that the most important thing that we can do is to come together in community, to build community, and that being in community is a political act. Immigrant America is living. It's a living and dignified part of our society, and unless you're Native American, we're all immigrant here, and we are all part of this. We're all part of this society whose rights must be advocated for and protected. And this year we started this collaboration between the Merequetengue, and El Merequetengue is the network of the Latin American landscape architects that started about 5 years ago. It started out as a celebration, as simply a place for us to come together, to meet each other, to know who we are, to recognize each other, and strengthen our community. Because for me, it was important to know who else was out there, because I didn't really know that many other Latin American landscape architects, and I know there's a lot of us. So the network has been growing. Last year, we had, for the first time, a gathering of all the affinity groups during the ASLA conference, and that was also really great. And it was great to see that we all need each other. If we come together, we're stronger together, we're stronger as a community, and the importance of having all of the affinity groups, all of us, be in community and represented. So this collaboration between Merequetengue then grew, and now we have the support of the local diversity, equity, inclusion chapters, the American Society of Landscape Architects, including the Arizona, Illinois, New York, Maryland, New York Upstate, who Anita is representing, and the Northern California chapter of ASLA, as well as some other firms like TERREMOTO, TOPOPHYLA, Bethany Rydmark Landscapes, and Crown Landscapes. And we all have come together in this conversation to learn about our constitutional and legal rights and how to build acknowledgement, share resources, and support each other in the times of fear and uncertainty with everything that is happening. So this, came about in one of our meetings that we meet regularly as a Merequetengue, and Anita reached out and said, "Hey, I want to talk about this. This is important. How do we talk about it?" And so we started talking about it, and for me, it was great that she reached out, because I was at the time just feeling very paralyzed, scared, not knowing what to do. And so her reaching out was like, yes, this is important. How do we do this? How do we talk about it? How do we express it? And a lot of what we have felt along the way of thinking this is that there's a lot of others out there who are thinking about this, and that mostly we need a space to come together and talk about this. So the collaboration, quickly grew and flourished into the planning of this, which initially was going to be one webinar, but we realized that there's a lot of other information. So it's now a series. We have 4 webinars planned. We're going to share them here in the chat, so you can see the other ones that are coming up. The next one today is Be Prepared. The next one is Be an Advocate, March 3rd, which is going to be led by TOPOPHYLA, TERREMOTO, and Michelle Franco. And then the next one is Learn, which is going to be that's on March 18th, led by Daisy Dominguez from the ACLU, and it's more about our rights. And then the next one, date TBD, but it's probably going to be during the ASLA conference, and it's going to be more of a role play and learning how to be proactive and how to put into practice everything that we're learning, and how to be in support. So we really poured our frustration, our insecurities, our desires to be proactive into this collective work of all the affiliate groups, the ASLA regional chapters, landscape architecture firms, professors, in learning how to navigate the unconstitutional attacks that are happening in the immigrant community. So Anita is going to be our lead today. I'm really proud and excited to introduce you to Anita. If you don't know her already, she's just a fantastic human being. I got to meet her a long time ago. We were both in graduate school together at UC Berkeley. She was a few years ahead of me. So I've always just looked up to Anita and seen everything that she's done. She is a licensed landscape architect with her MLA from UC Berkeley. She was a designer for public lands with the U.S. Forest Service for over 10 years. And then she spent another decade running her own residential firm, design build here in Northern California. And then in 2018, she moved to New York State, upper New York, where she founded her current practice, which is Bueno Movement and Design. She's been a very active local at both the local and national ASLA chapter and volunteer since 2011. She is currently serving as the chapter chair of the New York Upstate Diversity, Equity, Inclusion Committee. And I'm just really pleased to have her share the information that she has been thoroughly researching for us here today. So thank you, Anita, and welcome everybody.
Hi, thank you for that. I appreciate that. Um, yeah, let's just jump into it. So I'm gonna share my screen, show you my slides. That was a really nice introduction. And all right, you can see this, right? Well, we're ready to go. Yeah, thumbs up. So, well, let's just begin where the beginning is with the Indigenous Land Acknowledgement. This is a statement that recognizes that Indigenous peoples who have been dispossessed from their homelands and territories upon the institutions that we built, that this activity is actually taking place. So this is the land acknowledgement that was created for New York Upstate ASLA. It was developed with input from the Seneca Nation, and I just want to um, say that I'm sitting in the land of the Oneida Nation, and they were part of the five original nations of the Haudenosaunee, also known as the Iroquois uh, peoples. And um, they believe that the land and waters don't belong to them, but that we belong to the land and waters. And this I feel in my heart every time I walk around in my area, that it is something that's deep and embodied, and it's not just a box to check. It is actually something that we have to live with each step that we take. So with this land acknowledgement, we honor with gratitude the communities that came before us, and through their example, we commit ourselves to honoring the earth and all her gifts. And I want to extend this sentiment to all of us who currently dwell on this American continent, also known as Abya Yala from the Guna people of Panama and Colombia. And they refer to the American continent with the name Abya Yala means noble land that welcomes us all, which I think is very appropriate and fitting for this uh, for this event. So with that, let's move forward and let that land for a minute as we move forward with our learning objectives. So we're going to talk about a few different things: tactics used in immigration enforcement. We're going to talk about how enforcement priorities have evolved, our rights when we're interacting with federal agents. We're also going to talk about our legal rights on public versus private property and how public and private property is defined. How you can stay safe in different situations of immigrant enforcement, and how to begin creating a workspace or a personal preparedness plan. And the big disclaimer, I'm not a lawyer, I'm a landscape architect. And I've only I do this because I've done some research. I just synthesizing pertinent information for our professional community, and I'm going to share what I've learned. So I won't be able to answer some of your questions. I'll do my best, but if it's anything that's really specific about legal issues, um, we can save that for our future webinar when we're talking to an actual lawyer. So, what's happening? Let's start with the different immigration agencies. So, immigration agencies fall under the Department of Homeland Security, which is often referred to as DHS. And under DHS, there are three main agencies. There's Customs and Border Protection, or CBP, or Border Patrol, and they enforce immigration laws at or near the borders and ports of entry. And then there's Immigration and Customs Enforcement, ICE, as we call them, and they work throughout the country, typically finding and deporting immigrants. And then there's also U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services, and that's the agency that you would deal with when you're applying for a green card or citizenship or other kinds of immigration benefits. And they do not deal with immigration enforcement. So today we'll be focusing on Border Patrol and ICE. And ICE and CBP are relatively new. That's something that people don't seem to realize. The Department of Homeland Security didn't even exist before 2003. And that's after 9/11, the massive restructuring of the government took place, and the ICE and CBP took on the functions that were previously performed by Immigration and Naturalization Services. And since then, these agencies have evolved to suit the national political priorities. And it's shifting their focus. It used to be mostly on counterterrorism, and now it's stemming to immigration in general, but from Latin America in particular. So, under the current administration, um, as we know, immigration enforcement has expanded exponentially. They use surveillance, including cell phones and location tracking. They're using facial recognition. They're monitoring social media. They're scrubbing social media with AI. They're using license plate readers and drones to monitor protests. And they're doing stuff like data integration, which is cross-referencing tax records and immigration files and bank records. And there's all this new funding for immigration enforcement. Last year, with the big, beautiful bill, and I say that in quotes, there was that $75 billion given to Homeland Security. And right now, there's that tense negotiation going on, the partial government shutdown. It's still ongoing because they're negotiating over expanding funding for the Department of Homeland Security. So we'll see how that pans out. And then there's also been this expansion of agreements between ICE and local law enforcement, which is something I'll talk a little bit more about in a minute. Um, but the gist of it is more immigrants, including many with legal documentation, are being detained and even deported from the US, either involuntarily or through self-deportation. And they use intimidation and misinformation to get you to sign something uh, that has you self-deport. And that's all due to changing enforcement priorities. So the government sets enforcement priorities, and that says which categories or groups of immigrants that ICE or CBP should focus on. Who should they arrest? Who should they, um, you know, prioritize? And the current administration has canceled longstanding enforcement priorities where many undocumented immigrants were not a priority for enforcement. The focus used to be on threats to national security or to public safety. They focused on criminals. And this has ramped up so quickly and sloppily that many people with proper documentation are being swept up in the detainment and deportation, including U.S. citizens. The latest statistic that I saw from The Guardian was 77% of people detained do not have criminal records. Before, schools and hospitals and places of worship and public gathering sites were considered sensitive locations. And that's a place where immigration agents should not conduct enforcement. They would leave those places alone. But now that policy is canceled. And in 1953, the Department of Justice created this 100-mile zone. It defined 100 air miles as a reasonable distance from the border, and that allowed Border Patrol to uh, to expand their search powers from the border 100 miles inland. And on this map, you can see that many states in the Northeast, where I am, are mostly or completely within the 100-mile border zone. So we have become used to seeing Border Patrol um, pretty much all over, almost all of New York State is within the 100-mile zone. But now, what we've seen is that Border Patrol and ICE have assumed such expanded powers throughout the entire United States. So everybody else is now uh, seeing what might have been something that was not typical. So who are we talking about? Let's recognize these agents. Who are we interacting with? Well, first is Border Patrol. And like I said, they're usually enforcing immigration laws near the border. They have clearly marked uniforms. They're green. They have that nice round patch on their shoulder that says Border Patrol. They drive white vehicles with a green stripe. Although we're starting to see more CBP agents are now wearing masks, which they didn't before. And then we also have Immigration and Customs Enforcement. They do not have a uniform. They can be wearing anything. They can be wearing a uniform, they could be wearing plain clothes, different kinds of uniforms. They do not have their own vehicles. They're often in unmarked vehicles or they ride with local law enforcement. And lately, they're often masked and they carry military-style weapons. And they look like criminal enforcement. However, they do not have jurisdiction over criminal law. Immigration is under civil law. Uh, and then we have local police and sheriffs, and they're varied. They're not federal. They're easily identifiable, whether it's town or city cops or county sheriffs. They have clearly marked vehicles that say what their jurisdiction is, and unless they're detectives or undercover, they are easy to identify. But importantly, they monitor criminal activity and they enforce criminal law. And that's how they differ. But no matter what type of law enforcement you're interacting with, you can always ask them to identify themselves. You can always ask them to show proof, like a badge or a name tag. And in these pictures, you will notice that ICE and CBP often use the word police on their uniforms and on their vehicles. And it's important to remember that they are not the same as local law enforcement. They are not police. They are federal agents, which means they work for the federal government. And their job is to enforce civil immigration law, not criminal law. And vice versa, local police should not be enforcing criminal law. I mean, they should not be enforcing civil law. They should be enforcing criminal law, which is what they were hired and trained to do. However, we know that they often collude with each other. ICE and CBP often collude and work together with local law enforcement. And there's a program, it's called the 287G, and that's when ICE deputizes local police to act as immigration officers. They've done that in my own county here in upstate New York. And then they also share databases and they share information. And that means that local cops can detain individuals and hand them over to ICE. Now, these kinds of agreements have been around for a long time, but they have exploded in the last year. So, January of 2025, about 130 of these agreements were effective in the country, mostly along the border areas. But today, it's over 1,300, which is like a tenfold increase in 12 months. There's a few states, about 9 of them have dissolved these agreements, so they can't collude with the local law enforcement, at least not officially. Um, and in New York State, our governor is trying to pass something that'll limit these contracts, but there's a legislation called New York for All, NY for All. And if you are living in New York State, this is what you need to call your representatives about and to pass, to be aware of and to put their vote behind this much more comprehensive immigration protection that limits 287Gs and secures immigration rights for immigrants in New York. So they use different kinds of tactics that are not that some are more obvious than others. One is stopping people on the street and asking for their papers or asking, "Are you a U.S. citizen?" Um, uh, some of the sneaky ways that they identify people is that they will call your name out in a friendly manner and just say like, "Hey, Lucy," and you turn around and they have identified you. So it's like something that you need to be aware of. They're targeting people based on how they look, on what language they're speaking. They're using, well, the Supreme Court ruled last year that it was lawful to target people based on apparent race or ethnicity, or whether they were speaking Spanish or whether they speak English with an accent, or their presence at specific locations, like where they are, if they're at a bus stop, or if they're in an agricultural setting, or if they're on in a construction site, the type of work that they're performing. And it's important to realize that the lower courts ruled this as racial profiling. So I don't know what that says about our judicial system. You can make your own decisions from that. But so it's important to know our rights. So here is the Fourth Amendment. You can read it. I don't have to read it out loud. But what's important here is the word people. And it doesn't say US citizens. It doesn't say people who speak perfect English. It just says people. The Fourth Amendment is specifically about protecting private space from unlawful search and seizure, protecting people. Basically, you need a judicial warrant to search private space. And we also are going to talk about the Fifth Amendment. Again, we're talking about persons, all persons, not just special persons, not just citizens. This amendment grants multiple rights, but one of the rights that it includes is the right to remain silent. And we're going to be going back to that over and over through this through this presentation. We all have rights. We all have the same rights under the US Constitution, under state laws, and regardless of which law enforcement official we're interacting with, we always have the right to remain silent. You do not have to answer questions without consulting attorneys or an attorney. And if they come to your workplace looking for someone without valid paperwork, you do not need to tell them, even if they're at work. You do not need to respond. If they ask you if you are a US citizen, you can just say, "I don't need to answer this question." You also have the right to refuse searches of your personal belongings, of your bags, of your phone if it's locked. You have the right to refuse a search of your private home and of private spaces in the workplace. You could just say, "I do not consent to the search." You have the right to ask if you're being detained, and you have the right to ask the reason why. And if they don't have a reason, you can ask, "Am I free to go?" So there's exceptions to this. If you are at a border crossing, Border Patrol has expanded rights at the border. And that does include searching your car, searching your person, and asking questions about citizenship. And the other exception to this is if you are presented with a judicial warrant. And the judicial warrant names a specific person at a specific address during a specific time for probable cause, and it has to be signed by a judge or a magistrate. So these rights should be respected by law enforcement in theory, but we know in practice that people's rights get violated all the time. So what if law enforcement violates my rights? Well, the short answer is that knowing your rights and acting accordingly may help you in a legal case in the future. For example, if evidence is found during an unlawful search, that evidence can be thrown out in court. If we don't defend our rights and the rights of others, we will all lose our rights and freedoms. So this is important for everyone, whether we feel like we're at risk or we feel relatively safe. Um, I'm just thinking about what if I should add some stuff. Well, we're going to talk public versus private space. Well, but just about this morning in the New York Times, there was an article about a whistleblower who came in ICE training who came forward and is talking about how the trainings have been shrunk down, that they've like removed about 200 plus hours of training from a lot of these officers because they're trying to ramp up the amount of people that are being trained to be ICE agents. And what's happening is that folks are graduating or becoming active agents without having a clear idea of the limits of their authority. So even if they don't have clear ideas of what they can and cannot do, we need to be especially clear about what our rights are. So we'll talk about public and private space because our rights change depending on the type of space we're in. So public space is areas that anyone can go and access. It's usually outside, parks and sidewalks and streets, but it also can be inside. Lobbies are public space, waiting rooms are public space, parking lots are obviously public space. Public restrooms are public space. There's not private space in public restrooms. Private spaces include your home, your belongings, your phone if it's locked with a passcode, and they include the employee-only areas of a workspace. So we're going to talk about workspaces here. Workspaces are often hybrid spaces. They have both public and private spaces, so it can get a little bit complicated. While I'm talking about these things in the workspace, maybe you can think about where you would delineate public versus private space in your own place of work. The best practices are to have to install a lockable door. And we're going to start with what employers can do, and know that the same rights of privacy apply to your home if you uh, if you are dealing with agents at your house. So the first and easiest thing to do is to think about and then post clearly what is private space. And it can say something really easy like employees only, or no public admittance, or private staff only. Ideally, you would have a lockable door between public and private because ICE has been walking through unlocked doors to get access to private space, or they get you to open the door a crack and then they push it open. So it's um, really important to verbally repeat, you do not have consent to enter. This is private space for employees only. And the only way immigration can legally enter a private space is with a judicial warrant or with permission, kind of like a vampire. They need the permission to walk in. Um, so you need to make a plan in your workplace and you need to practice the plan so that it's like a fire drill so that everyone knows what to do and where to go in the event that immigration comes to your door. And so the idea is to create a federal agent protocol for your workplace. And this is a sample federal agent protocols. It would be something like this. First, stay calm. Do not run or do not get flustered. Ideally, you will be very professional. The more professional you are, the stronger your case is legally and in the court of public opinion. So it's important to self-regulate and breathe and practice having that veneer of calmness, even if you're racing inside. And this only comes from actually practicing. You want to alert everyone that the law enforcement agency is attempting to enter the premises by maybe in a loud voice, or if your workplace has an intercom, you could say something very calmly like, all staff, please stay calm and follow our federal agent protocols. And it's this quiet alarm that tells everybody to 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 be on alert and to get ready to do something. You want to designate a point person to be the person to interact with the agents. Typically, it's a principal or a supervisor or the owner, and start by clearly stating that the agents are forbidden from accessing private areas without a judicial warrant, saying you do not have permission to enter. This is an employee-only area. Let me get the owner or the principal. And that is useful because it can be used as a delay tactic, so everyone has a chance to be prepared. Uh, You maybe one person's job would be to go and lock any interior doors, separating public and private areas. And maybe someone else's job would be to start filming or recording, whether it's audio or video, so that you have a record. And that designated point person is the only person who talks to the agents. That person would ask the agents to identify themselves. What agency are you with? Can you show me an ID? And they would also ask to show me the warrant. If they produce a warrant, then you take a picture of the warrant and start reviewing it carefully, because there's two kinds of warrants. And this is an example of a judicial warrant. It needs to be signed by a judge. It says U.S. District Court at the top. It doesn't say Department of Homeland Security. And if this warrant is valid, it'll allow entry into the private areas. You have to make sure everything is correct, that there's no spelling errors, the address is correct, the person named on the warrant actually works there. Check the date because it's only valid for 14 days. If it's 15 days after the date, it's not valid anymore. Check for the signature. This is the most important piece, that it has to be signed by a judge or a magistrate. And if you're not sure that that's a judge or a magistrate, you can Google the name of judges, their public information. These are hard warrants to get. They need probable cause, and you got to convince a judge to sign off on it. So they're usually not the warrants that people use, that the agents use. They use something called an administrative warrant many times, not always, but this is what they're doing lately. And this is also called a warrant of removal, and it's much easier to obtain because it's granted by DHS themselves. It says Department of Homeland Security on the top. It's signed by an immigration officer, not a judge. And someone told me that ICE agents can actually get them downloaded onto their phone, so they can get them really easy. But this does not grant ICE permission to enter or search private areas. So, if it's a judicial warrant and you made sure it's valid, there's a couple of things you can do. If you have in-house counsel, if you have a lawyer, you might be able to delay by saying that you need to consult with your lawyer before the agents can enter, and they may or may not abide. And at this point, you might want to call your lawyer anyway. But if it's a judicial warrant, you have to let them in. However, they can only search the things that are on the warrant. So watch and record the agents to see and make sure that they're complying with what's written on the warrant. If the agents are searching areas or talking to people, interviewing people that are not on the warrant, you can voice your objection. And as an employer, you do not want to help agents sort people by their immigration status or the country that they're from, which is something that happened not too far from here in Cato, where they came in and separated people by how they looked. You want to remind folks to stay calm and stay silent. And ideally, they'll know that because everyone's been practicing, and say, I do not consent. I do not need to answer these questions. But one thing you do not want to do is interfere physically with the agents. You can only voice concerns verbally. And as an employer, please don't hide anyone or help them flee or lie or present any false information, because that will get you everybody in trouble. If they show you an administrative warrant, you do not have to grant access. You do not have to say if that employee is working that day, even if they're there. You don't have to take them to that person. Basically, no valid judicial warrant means no entry into private space. And so you could take this plan and post it in different places in the workplace so that everyone knows what's going on, or something similar, whatever would work for you. But you need to practice and role play, practice saying the words. So just a quick acknowledgement of construction sites and design build firms. I had a design build firm, and it's really difficult to keep employees safe because of the exposure. There's really no good solutions. I would say use similar protocols, designate a point person, train employees, alert everyone to stay calm and follow protocols, record. There's talk about putting up a temporary fence with a locked gate around your site, but I don't know if it will hold up under law as private space. You can still post it as private space, restricted access, no public admittance, and hopefully it'll at least slow agents down and see it's better than nothing. There's also maybe if it's a big enough job, there's an on-site trailer, an office that people often use at on job sites, and that can be posted as private space and the door locked. Closing and locking the door is really the only way to unequivocally delineate private space and see if anyone has better ideas about that. Please, post them in the chat and see if you can share. Um, The only way that you're able to prove that your rights have been violated is to stay calm and follow the protocols and record everything. And so after an incident, you really want to create the best evidence. Uh, Immediately after an event and before anyone starts talking to each other, just back to your desk and write everything down, everything you can remember. And you can use this list posted somewhere. Write down all the details of what happened, write down the time, the agents, the number of agents, what kind of agents, were they wearing masks? Did they identify themselves? If you saw their vehicles, the description of the cars, if they entered with a warrant, did they use force? Did they damage property? And then have names of anyone that was detained or the list of people that were present during the incident and have everyone write it down before you can talk to each other. That's the way to make the best evidence. And then after that, you can take a deep breath and get back to connecting with each other. If you are recording the incident, which I hope you are, um, proof that they have done something illegal may help with someone's immigration case. Um, if agents lie about an incident, proof of what actually happened may help defend someone against charges. And we saw this many times we saw it most recently in Minnesota, but this has happened. There's lots of cases that have been thrown out because the video evidence does not corroborate what the agents had said happened. The best evidence is to keep the video going. Don't stop and start it. If they ask you to move back, point the video down at your feet and show your feet backing up that you're complying, and then continue recording. And if you have security video in the office, make sure that somebody knows to go make sure it's recording. When you have the video done, save it with the original file name, change nothing, upload it to a server, get it off your phone, put it on a computer in case the phone gets confiscated or the file gets deleted. And do not post or share it without either consulting with a lawyer or a local advocacy group because you want to be strategic about sharing it. If you are taking the video, focus on the agents that are doing the have them be the subject and not whomever they're targeting. You want to try to protect people's privacy. And sometimes it's easier to record audio. And in that case, you want to narrate what's happening, narrate the details of what's happening in the room. And if you do decide to post or share it, blur out any identifying features to protect the privacy and the safety of the people involved. So after an incident in New York State, we're really lucky. We have Letitia James as our Attorney General, and she created this federal action reporting form where you can upload info, pics, videos of any kind of immigration activities. And they maybe if you're Attorney General in whatever state you're sitting in has one, you can Google, see if you can find federal action reporting form and see if it's something that's available in your state. Um, So for employees, maybe your employer is not willing or able to create this Fourth Amendment safe kind of workplace, or they don't have a plan, or maybe it's an employer who's likely to grant permission to have them come in the house or come in the workplace, the private space. You can still protect yourself and your coworkers by knowing your rights. So gather with coworkers, make a plan together, and always remember, first and always, stay calm. Do not run. If you run, it gives them probable cause to arrest you, and then all your rights go out the window. So you have the right to remain silent. Don't answer questions. Don't sign anything without speaking to a lawyer. Ask if you're being detained. If yes, ask why. If no, then you can calmly walk away. Do not consent to a search. Repeat, I do not consent to this search. However, you can't resist a search. So there's a fine line there, right? You can say, I do not consent, but you can't get in the way. So that's why you need to practice. Record what you can and keep your phone locked with the passcode because if they can open your phone by putting it up to your face or putting your fingerprint on it, it's considered unlocked. It's considered public. You have the right to record what's happening to you and what's happening around you. In New York State, you don't need permission to record. I don't know if that's true in every state. You have the right to inform people, other people, of their rights. And you can say that. I have the right to inform other people of their rights. When they say, don't talk to him, don't talk to her, don't talk to them. But you cannot interfere with the agents, and they may have a loose definition of what that means. So stay calm, stay safe, and comply and be respectful, even if they are not. You want to keep your copies of important documents safe and accessible, and have a plan for your family and your loved ones. So we're talking about that. Be prepared. Make a preparedness plan. This is a good one. Make a preparedness plan. Make a preparedness plan. Make it now for what will happen to your family, what will happen to your children if you were detained. If you are at risk, you need to find a lawyer who can help with your case and designate an emergency contact. And this should be a trusted adult, somebody who you know will act quickly and responsibly. First of all, someone who will pick up the phone, you know, is the most important piece. And ideally, they have stable immigration status and they can gather your important documents and they can notify family members and get your attorney in contact with you and submit documents for your defense. And you also want to find someone to take care of your children if you're unable to. So if you are at risk, memorize your A number. The A number is that 9-digit identifying number. It's given to non-citizens by immigration authorities, but it's also given to federal employees. I have an A number from working with the Forest Service. Write it on your arm if you need to. Just memorize that number. And then you want to organize all your important documents and keep them somewhere safe and accessible to you or to your designated person. Physical and digital copies. Uh, you might want to also consider using a location app for your loved ones. I don't know too much about that, but folks that have experience with that, go ahead and put that in the chat and share it with folks. Um, and then there's links to all of these forms. These are different forms that you might consider preparing. Um, and those are going to be in the chat. I think someone's putting them in the chat. I hope soon. Um, And the first one is really easy. I mean, it takes a minute, but it's important information about you. It keeps all your information in one place, your name, your birth date, your A number, your case numbers, your allergies, your medications, health insurance numbers, emergency contacts, all of it. And do the same thing for your child. Include with your children their after school activities or their school. And neither of these forms need to be notarized or witnessed, so it's really easy to do them by yourself, and it keeps everything in one place. You might want to also have permission for your child to travel, either alone or with a non-parent, in case that they need to go to other family members in other parts of the country or wherever they need to go. And then there's two forms for for the for children called standby guardianship. With the standby guardianship, they can travel, or the parental designation form. With that one, they can't travel, but they can make educational and medical decisions. These are important because it avoids the involvement of child services, and neither of them take away your rights as a parent, and they can be revoked at any time. They do need to be notarized. And if you give a copy of this to the designated caregiver, also make copies and give them to places where the caregiver might need them. So the school would get one, and after school activities, or churches, or wherever the children might go. Keep the original safe and make your own copies and carry them on you and have them accessible. You want to also save money for emergencies because even a small amount can make a big difference. You need to access money in detention, whether it's for a lawyer or to buy necessities. And if you don't have direct deposit, then you need to make a permission to pick up a paycheck. There's a lot of times where the family net that so the main breadwinner gets taken by uh, immigration, and then the family doesn't have access to the finances that they need. Um, Ideally, you have online banking and you can have a debit card so anyone could access the money in the family. And you might also consider making a joint account so your family can access the money. And then if you, uh, I've been told by folks who actually are running their own firms that they've made power of attorneys and designated people to be in charge of a sweeping amount of different authorities. Someone obviously that you trust. But what that does is if you can't run your own firm, it keeps the business going in case you are detained, God forbid. So if you are detained, the immigration detention system is scary and confusing. It's difficult, and every detention center is different. And when you're detained, you first go through processing, and then that might be where you're going to be held, or you may be transferred to a different facility. But it doesn't, even if you're detained, you have rights. Civil law is a little different than criminal law. You do not have a lawyer appointed to you if you cannot afford one, like you do in criminal law, the Miranda rights. But for civil law, you do have the right to be represented by a lawyer, and they need to give you time to find a lawyer. So you have the right to take time to find a lawyer. Don't sign anything without talking to a lawyer first because detainees sometimes are coerced or um, lied to sign self-deportation documents, and then they get deported. Um, and then you can contact your consulate, but it's tricky if you're claiming asylum. I'm not a lawyer again, so that would be something that you want to discuss with someone who knows more about these kinds of things. So here's a couple of um, numbers and um, websites that I think are going to be really important. If you are detained, memorize this number. If you want to get connected to resources from inside detention, you can call this immigration detention hotline anywhere. Um, and it's national. And then that's also going to be in the chat, so you could screenshot it if you want, but you don't have to. And then we're going to be able to share this after the end. How much time do I have? Almost no time. Okay, let me keep going. Um, so if you are or you think you might become an emergency contact, this info's for you. To find somebody, you can go to locator.ice.gov and search using their information. Um, you can be detained in private detention or local jails or federal detention facilities. So it usually takes some time for someone to show up in this system. So you might want to try different versions of their name if it doesn't show up. And there's also some other options after this. Other ways to find people is to either contact enforcement and removal operations at the field office. They have that website. If you know the detention facility where the person's being held, you want to contact them directly, and you can do that at that website. If someone's being held by the federal prison, you want to go to their website. If someone's being held in a state criminal facility, you can look them up on a website called VineLink, and that's for national. These are all national sources. And then to find a person's court date, this is also national. You can either visit or call, and um, this Immigration Advocates is legal assistance nationally for different nonprofit organizations for either free or low cost uh, legal representation. And then bonds are money that's paid to allow someone that's released to make sure they come back and appear in court. And if you're the person you're assisting has been granted a bond and they can't afford it, they can probably get bond assistance from a bond fund. And these are two, one in New York State and one national. And then finally, these are my sources. So I used fourthworkplace.org. It's a North Carolina-based movement about the Fourth Amendment and making a Fourth Amendment friendly workplace and getting more businesses to join that. Uh, New York Immigration Coalitions for the whole state, they have more information for and resources for immigrants and allies than I could even go through. One of their spin-offs is the Syracuse Immigrant and Refugee Defense Network, and those are the folks that I attended most of their trainings for. They don't have a website, but they're active on social media. And then the main ACLU had a training that I attended. And so that's how I know what I know. And that's how this whole thing. Actually, I used the template for a lot of this stuff was from the SIRDN, Syracuse Immigrant and Refugee Defense Network. So this is also uh, when we share this, you can use this in your own. This is not proprietary information, is what I'm trying to say. All right. Oh, I can take a breath. And this is the next piece. This is happening next week. Um, March 3rd is Tuesday, uh, when we do the next piece. So I hope that was useful. I don't know if I should continue to share. Are people still there? Are y'all out still out there? Yeah, okay, good.
We're still here.
All right. I don't know. Have there been questions? How's the chat been going? I haven't been looking.
Yeah, yeah, there's a lot of wonderful resources in the chat. Thank you, everyone, for putting those in and sharing. And I think we're going to stop recording